Chief Ingram, how are you?
I'm doing well. Good morning, Matt.
Good morning, sir. Listen, man, Caldwell, a lot of things happening out in Caldwell. I like Caldwell a lot for a lot of reasons. One, because you're the chief police there, but two, because policing there it's one of the things that's working in my mind well. One thing in particular, after the horrible tragedy in New Orleans, you guys increased patrols that there are some people immediately are like, this is just reactionary, or this is just showboating, or this is just whatever, whatever criticism people had of you, chief of police, saying, hey, we're going to up it. I want my citizens to feel safe. Whatever the criticisms were, just days later, we had another really scary event, in Payette. It's like, listen, crazy knows no bounds, and crazy emboldens crazy. And you, as chief of police, you saw that, you took responsibility. Walk me through your decision on this.
So that's a great question, and I appreciate you having me here and recognizing the great things that the men and women do in the Caldwell Police Department every day, day in and day out, like right now, so I can be here with you. But prior to coming to Caldwell, I served in Los Angeles as a Los Angeles police officer for almost 2 decades. And one thing that struck me as a young cop is when there was national tragedy somewhere across the country, there was always a lack of communication from our administrative staff, our command staff, our executive staff, down to the lowest level of the line officer. Sure. And, as a young cop, we're always thinking like 9/11, things like that happen, and we barely hear about those things. Like you watch it on the news. And so for me as a cop, the last place I want to hear about some national tragedy is turning on the news or on Facebook or on Instagram. I want to hear it from my administration. So as soon as that happened and I started getting some preliminary information, I started talking to our local, state, and federal partners, and I got a good picture of what actually happened that morning in New Orleans. I wanted to send an email out to my department, letting them know that what our mission is and exactly how we're going to re-engage and get refocused, and let them know that we're aware of these things and let them know that we support their work as well. But like you just said, crazy knows no bounds. But in our world, crime and criminals don't have boundaries. And I'm not talking about the gang stuff. I'm talking about crime in general. And so although we want to believe that we're insulated here in Idaho and that, the crime doesn't really happen here, it's here. We live in a state that is very, very, very conservative, which I love and appreciate and respect. However, sometimes we have radicalization on both sides, right? And you have states like California or Washington that are radicalized on the left, but in Idaho, it's to the right. And so with that brings polarization. And when you polarize communities, you have issues like we had in Payette, where you have a person that put an IED on a train track, and that was basically masked and covered up by the Tesla bombing in Vegas. And so, that's happening right here on our soil in our state, 15 miles west of us in Payette County. And so I didn't actually know about that because it wasn't covered on the news. And a friend of mine from LAPD, who's a detective that works their JRIC down there, actually called me to get in contact with the Payette County Sheriff because they had a lead on that same suspect in Los Angeles. So we're putting all these things together based on relationships. And my whole point is to my officers and to my employees that they matter. They matter, and happy cops are productive cops, and productive cops keep communities safe. And so once that happened, I started thinking to myself, you know what, let's push some of that same email out, that same message that I sent to the department out to the community. So our people, our stakeholders out there, our businesses and our churches, our places of worship and our schools and all the places in Caldwell that make Caldwell amazing know that first and foremost, we saw what happened in New Orleans. And as the chief of police, we're not going to accept that nasty behavior in Caldwell. We're going to make sure that our officers are out there re-engaging our community. And really, I wouldn't say we increased our patrols. We repurposed and redirected our patrols. So normally when officers are at the station, typing up a report or doing something like that, no, I want them sitting in a church parking lot. I want them going to a school. I want them going to the Indian Creek Plaza and just hanging out doing that stuff. We're basically repurposing them with high visibility instead of just parking at the station and doing what they normally do, because I think we owe it to the community for them to feel safe and feel secure, because it can happen anywhere, and it always happens in middle America.
Man, there's so much here. A question for you. What were the details on, if you can talk about, because I'm sure it's an ongoing investigation, but what were the details that the public can know about the Payette incident?
I don't really know too many of the details other than there was an IED that was found on the train track that someone put there. And the Nampa Police Department's bomb squad actually went and recovered that device and disposed of it, blew it up, and rendered it safe.
And the suspect is in custody, correct?
Yes.
And he was somebody that you were saying was the LA departments were looking for.
Yes. Yeah, the LAPD Major Crimes Division, he was on their radar. So I got a call from a detective supervisor who knew me from LAPD asking to get in contact with the sheriff specifically to try to tie their cases together.
Now, when you were talking extremism, was there a motive ascribed to this guy, or was there the suspect saying like he was doing it in the name of, whatever organization?
That I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what his motives were or why he did it.
There's a really funny tendency that I'm seeing play out in pretty much every tribe or every arena of people, which is essentially nobody wants to acknowledge that there could be problems within their ranks. Okay, for instance, I did these two interviews on medicine. One with Dr. John Tribble, who's the Southwest District Board of Health physician, and Southwest District Health recently voted to eliminate the COVID vaccine from the offerings that they have. Shoot, I don't even know if I can publish this now because I said COVID vaccine. They eliminated the COVID shot. I'll drop that. They eliminated the COVID shot from their offerings. And then I also had immediately thereafter, I had Dr. David Payette, who was a CEO and president of St. Luke's Health Organization. And Dr. David Payette is more in favor of the shot, and obviously Dr. Tribble is not in favor of the shot. And I post both of these episodes 24 hours apart, and the hate and insanity that I got from both sides instantaneously. I post Dr. Tribble's, and instantaneously more people from the left, I believe, came after me, browbeating me, shaming me, saying how horrible I am. And then, of course, I published Dr. Payette the next day, and instantaneously it's a reversal. People from the right come on and say, and what I found to be great is in these conversations, both people, Dr. Tribble is an active physician,
right?
And he's like, listen, none of this stuff is perfect. I believe in consent, and I believe that people should be informed consent, like all of that. And Dr. Payette was saying the same thing. He's like, listen, just do your homework. I believe in informed consent. I believe in consent. I believe in choice for people. These things are not perfect. There's nothing that's perfect. It's like, God bless it, man. How reasonable. But it's almost like people cannot get to the point where they acknowledge like, all right, look, I'm part of this group and there are flaws in this group, right? I'm part of this group. There are flaws in this group. And
Sure.
I see that also when you're talking about extremism, which is kind of like, look, I love conservatism, right? I moved here with my family. I love this state. But we also have some groups of people that are extreme to the right, just like you and I both saw it play out in California, extreme to the left. And that was terrible too.
Right.
And it's almost like it's like people that are conservative don't want to call it. It's like, no, you can go too far. Like this can breed bad things.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's always too much, right? Too much of water is bad for you. Too much food is bad for you. Too much alcohol is bad for you. Too much politics on one side or the other it can be bad for you. And people are forgetting the middle of just the rule of law in the United States, the rule of law and doing right versus wrong and just seeking justice, right? And so what we're dealing with is people that may have been, conservative, right? And may have supported the government and may have supported the rule of law and democracy. But in 2020, we saw a crazy thing happen, not only in the country, but in the world, where it really polarized people. And attacks on police officers went up, and attacks on schools went up, and attacks on government went up. And you saw this radicalization and polarization of people, of groups. And now they're completely opposed. And one thing that I'll say is we never, in the LAPD, never prepared to have two sides of a skirmish line that were basically put the police in the middle, right? We always train when you do like mass demonstrations or protest, it's usually one group is protesting, a building or a location or something like that, a picket, like a standard picket. Well, in 2020, we saw you had the BLM, Antifa type anti-police on the right side. And I'm using that figuratively.
Broad strokes.
And then you have, the pro-Trump or the pro-police people on the other side. And who's in the middle? The police officers. But in both of those groups, you have really bad people. You have people that don't like the government on one side. You have people that don't like the government on the other side. And the cops are in the middle. So what we learned in 2020 is that hey, at the end of the day, we have the Constitution to uphold and protect, and the sanctity and the rule of law in our country and democracy, and we don't take sides. We do what the law says, and we enforce the law without fear, favor, malice, or any sort of affection towards that.
Sure.
And we just do our job. And so both of those groups were meeting in the middle, and we realized, we got to change our ways. And at the end of the day, a lot of people moved here from states like California or Washington or Oregon or Colorado to get out of that mindset or to get out of that polarization. And they came here and they're becoming more radicalized and more polarized. And you have a lot of anti-government people here. And, I know you're aware there's a lot of, rumors out there and conspiracies about the Tesla bombing in Vegas. But at the end of the day, we don't know what happened. But what we do know is there was a car that was detonated and it blew up, right? I don't really care about the political, affiliations or associations of that incident, other than lives could have been lost. And those cops that responded there and the firefighters that went there were brave, and they put themselves, the mission first before themselves. And so that we can have the same thing happen here, because Ruby Ridge happened here. Things happen in Idaho, and sometimes we don't get the national, recognition or attention because we don't have a big population base like Vegas does, or, Bourbon Street. But the bottom line is you have folks here that have radicalized and are willing to do whatever they want or can with enough, influence to do something crazy. And, Indian Creek Plaza is a huge destination for people, not only in Canyon County, but people in Ada County, people in Ontario, Oregon. They come year round. It's a year round destination. And the last thing that I ever want to happen for anyone in Caldwell is something happens in that plaza or anywhere in the city of Caldwell and lives get lost. So politics aside, we want to protect lives.
You have you've told me before that you have engaged with individuals that, at least at first glance portrayed negative sentiment towards you or to your department or the job you're doing. And you've actually invited them. It's like, hey, come talk. Like, if you have an issue, my door's open. I'm chief. Come talk to me. No problem. Right.
Yep.
And the one thing that I'm experiencing and really understanding more and more intimately as of late is that there's an aspect of censorship and not having a voice and not having anybody that hears you that I think leads to a large degree of what people consider radicalization, which is like you push somebody to the corner far enough and you minimize their capacity to engage in conversation long enough, and it's like they snap. And there are reasons. Again, going back to the medical thing, or going to Ruby Ridge, like I put out a post from former Sheriff Gary Rainey recently, and people got really upset about it. He had mentioned Ruby Ridge, and somebody reached out to me. They're like, I did a dissertation at BSU like a couple years ago on Ruby Ridge. It's not what people think.
Yeah,
and it's one of those things where it's like, okay, there's a history of minimizing and pushing to the side a certain group of thought. People that predominantly group together because they have similar lines of thoughts. Sure. And there's enough there that for instance, the last 4 years or, online censorship now, or, whatever the characteristics of our society take on, there's enough there that it's like, I look at them, I'm like, yeah, I can understand how you got to that. Like, I don't share that position, but I understand how you got there. Right. And part of that is minimizing people and not integrating them or bringing them in with communication, which is, hey, if you dislike what I do, I saw a clip just this morning from a Harvard professor who was talking about in 2016 how he overtly went out to do research to prove that cops were like, overly had a bias towards killing African Americans. Mm-hmm. This particular professor is African American, right? And he said it took him like forever, and they realized there was no bias.
Yeah,
right. And he was like, my colleagues told me not to publish the paper. It was like 150 pages, and people were like, you can't put this out. And he was like, this is the data. We did it twice. I did it with 2 different groups of researchers. Everybody arrived at the same position. But again, it's minimizing that communication that radicalizes people. Do you think that there's a place in this state that communication holds that we could reintegrate or bring people back to the center? Because I feel like the Antifa and then, like, let's say the Proud Boys or whatever groups on either side's like, can we just talk? Like, could you just tell me what you're upset about? And let's bring everybody a little bit closer to the center, but let's do it with communication.
No, I completely agree. And I think that your platform here at the Ranch Podcast is one of the only places that I've seen in Idaho that brings people on both sides together at the table. And then you push out information, right? because like to go back to your first point of, people are upset or, when Timothy McVeigh, blew up the Oklahoma City, I'm sorry. When Timothy McVeigh blew up Oklahoma City,
there's a Unabomber, right?
Well, and then Ted Kaczynski was the Unabomber.
Wait, Timothy McVeigh.
Yeah, so he was Oklahoma City.
Ted Kaczynski, these were different guys. Yeah,
correct. Yeah,
and Kaczynski was the hoodie guy, right?
Correct.
Got it.
So you have these dudes back in the 90s, right, that are doing that kind of stuff. I mean, imagine if social media existed back then. Well, all we had was standardized news, but I'm sure that anyone could argue, just like on 9/11, you get 72 virgins if you crash an airplane in the World Trade Center, whatever Al-Qaeda and the radical Islamic Muslims were saying. And so now with social media and people can hide behind their keyboard and say whatever they want, and people take it as gospel. But my challenge to those people is, why don't you get on here? Why don't you come to the ranch? Why don't you get out here? Why don't you come to my office? Why don't you meet me for a cup of coffee? Instead of talking all this hate about, oh, you have over patrols, or why are you deploying officers at churches? Well, because churches are victims. They, unfortunately, in the United States of America, they become victims and targets of radicalization, terrorism. And so I want to make sure that my community knows that they are safe and they have a voice, and we hear them, and we want to put ourselves before them and make sure that they're safe. And so, the communication is key here. And I think, like, not to toot your horn, Matt, but you have a pretty good platform, and you have people on here that represent both sides of whatever aisle you want to call it. I'm not just talking about politics, but back to the whole thing with people upset or whatever. Yeah, you're going to have people upset no matter what we do, right?
No matter what.
No matter what.
You can't help it.
No matter what. I mean, like I said, if there was social media around during 9/11 or during the Oklahoma City bombing or any of these things, you would have people from those groups that were responsible for those heinous acts on our democracy, those attacks, saying, "Oh no, it was a government conspiracy. It was this conspiracy. It was that." Someone has to blame someone, right? And they can't accept the fact that there are evil people out there that do evil things to nice people, and that's the bottom line.
God, man, that's true. May I ask you, the Caldwell School District has had a vote to eliminate a bunch of SROs at the end of last school district, correct?
Yes.
Caldwell Police Department was supplying those SROs to the school district. What do you know particulars on what Caldwell School District has done in the wake of that? And what's the relationship that is maintained now between the Caldwell Police Department and the Caldwell School District?
So obviously, first and foremost, our relationship with any school should be probably the most sacred relationship that we hold as law enforcement, because the most vulnerable population of our community are our children, right? And so the issue with Caldwell School District and the police department is that they had a levy that didn't pass last year. Well, 2 times ago.
Yes.
It was last year, now that we're in January.
Sure.
And then it got passed again. So in the meantime, they couldn't fund the SRO positions, the school resource officer positions. So we basically cut those back. They hired a private security firm that was going to basically come in. And there's a lot of miscommunication out there. We've been in, obviously, negotiations and contract stuff with the school district. But the issue is that they nearly almost paid as much money for private security than they did for police officers. And so people were upset, saying, well, why are we paying for this, but we don't want to fund police officers? So all that to say is, we got a grant with the Caldwell School District to fund 1 police officer in the school. But now there's some political issues above my pay grade that have to be resolved with city council and the school district and those executive level conversations. But the bottom line is we shouldn't have kids that feel unsafe in those schools. So what the school district just approved 2 weeks ago is to have armed security guards with rifles and pepper spray and tasers. But that's a whole issue in itself. I don't want people that we haven't vetted or trained to go to run around schools with rifles and pistols and stuff. I support the Second Amendment. I love guns. But to have people that we have personally not vetted or trained, and then to incorporate them with officers, creates a huge blue on blue type situation when you have folks that are armed running around a school that have not been vetted and trained by us. And so that, we have shootings where we have police officers that accidentally shoot other police officers during high stress critical incidents, like an active shooter at a school. So the last thing we want to do is have, security guards that we're not really familiar with, running around schools with rifles, because that could create a huge problem and be catastrophic for the kids at the school, but also for the police and the security guards themselves.
Yeah, House Bill 415 from last year, right,
Yep.
which was moved to make public schools Second Amendment zones and say, hey, teachers can carry, the whole bit. One of the major criticisms of that, and I had a lot of people on that were for it and a lot of people against it, again, as I do, and Lieutenant Sean Harper from Meridian PD really articulated, is like, listen, you have people, like, first off, horrible situation, say some tragedy does start happening and cops arrive, like, is there a system in place? Like, does this bill 415 from last year, he's like, does this bill put some protocol in place where it's like the good guys that are already at the school that have firearms have to put on like a pink vest or something so they can be identified? Like, how do you identify those people? Are those people trained to consider the backdrop of where they're shooting? Because like, you shoot at somebody, It's like, great, you either hit or you don't. What's directly behind those people? Like, can you move and shoot? All these different things. And again, I'm not from law enforcement, and I didn't even consider those things, but there are protocols that schools in Idaho and districts in Idaho currently have armed security on their campuses. And they're like, look, this is our protocol. This is what we do. Like, you got to do this, this, and this. So when you talk about like, hey, we don't want people running around with firearms that we haven't vetted and we don't have a set relationship with and understand very clearly, like, okay, you guys do this in the first 60 seconds. And then when we show up, you do this. Yeah, that makes complete sense. Like, it's more variables. And even in the best of situations, sometimes law enforcement shoots the law enforcement. And that's horrible to even consider. But I mean, imagine it's like law enforcement and then a private entity that you don't have a relationship with.
Well, and that's the issue. And I've worked a lot of major events and sporting events and concerts and stuff, and we have rules. We don't even allow other police officers, and I know it's different everywhere, but generally speaking, the best practice, the industry standard, is you do not want, well, first of all, you don't want drunk cops with guns running around, right? Ooh. That's always a bad, or drunk people with guns.
Sure.
But we have the industry standard for the, for NCAA or NFL or MLB is no guns are allowed in these stadiums or concerts or anything. It doesn't matter if you're a cop or not, because the last thing you need is the uniform officers that are there seeing some cop trying to save the day, running around with a gun in plain clothes or wearing a jersey or something, right?
Whatever, right.
And the other thing is training, and each specific team has their own rules of engagement or, the way they train together and operate, and departments are the same way, right? And mostly in Idaho, everyone trains together, so it's good, but I don't know who these security guards are, and I'm not saying it can't happen. Right. But if they're not showing up to our training days, they're not showing up with our officers. And even when we work like undercover, like when I worked a lot of undercover assignments, we do these massive protests or demonstrations where we have officers in plain clothes infiltrating these groups like BLM or Antifa. We have to have a standard way of operating where if something happens, we have to identify ourselves. It's not just going to be a badge, holding up a badge, because there are a lot of fake badges out there too, right? We have to have something that unifies us as police officers so we don't get hit by our own fire. And so until that happens, we can't just arbitrarily say, oh yeah, it's great, let's go in there and let's put cops and security guards together armed and running around a school. It's not going to work. And it's good until it's not good. And so I'm not saying we can't do that. We can't do it unless we have the rules, the expectations, the training solidified and together as one. Because when we allow that to happen, we're going to create issues later on. And in this industry, those issues become catastrophic and life-changing.
Absolutely. Listen, I know it's a working day for you. I appreciate you coming in. I appreciate what you're doing for Caldwell. Is there anything you'd like to say here at the end?
I just appreciate the support, and 2025 is going to be a great year. We're doing a lot of really good things. We're getting a lot of new equipment. The budget looks good. There's a lot of criticism out there of the way we're spending money, the way we're training, the way we're hiring people. But I got to say, I'm so proud of the work that we're doing. I'm so blessed by having such a supportive local government to actually fund a police department that values public safety in our community, that keeps Caldwell safe. We're the 14th fastest growing city in the country, the fourth largest city in the state of Idaho, and we simply cannot do that without the love and support of our community. and all the people that show up to and answer the call every day. And so I just really appreciate all the people that believe in us and are there to ensure that we can do our job to protect them.
God, man, honestly, and you know it and I know it, but the number of vocal dissenters, detractors, haters that are out there, it pales in comparison to the number of supporters. But the supporters, just in my experience with my own endeavors, it's like the people that support me are numerous, and they're getting on with their lives, right? And I'll hear a little something here or there. First out, like I don't go to like big events and like, hey, I'm Matt. Like I just do my work and I go home. So occasionally people will reach out. They're like, hey man, like just to let you know, I really like what you're doing. And like, I know you get the same thing, which is the number of people, the regulars that hate on you, I'm sure seem to be numerous if you just look at the comment section, right? It's like the same 20 people or same 30 people, and they're always just rah, rah, rah. But man, you're right. Like I only hear good things about Caldwell from people that are actually in Caldwell. And I mean, it's a beautiful thing. And man, I support you. I hope you keep doing what you're doing. God bless you, sir.
I appreciate that, Matt. And I first and foremost, I don't let these people live rent free in my head, and I don't subscribe to their nonsense. Yes. And I embrace haters. I love haters. It means I'm doing my job. And if they're talking about what we're doing, then obviously, we're doing our job and we're sending a message. Yeah. I'm still here. I'm going to be here. I will be the chief as long as the community wants me, and the cops want me to be here. But at the end of the day, I have a job to do, and my job is to protect and secure the Constitution of the United States of America and keep our community safe.
God bless it. Thanks for coming in, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.